Welcome to the Black Gay History Channel. Please share this video and subscribe to this channel for more captivating content. There's been such a global focus on LGBTQ rights in the East African country, Uganda, and there has been so much misinformation and outright lies told about LGBTQ people in these discussions that it can be extremely frustrating when you realize how misguided these judgments have been. While there has only in recent decades been an uptick in an anti-LGBTQ legislation and sentiments in the country, the truth is that gay marriages and several gender identities existed in the many Ugandan ethnic groups prior to British colonization. There are so many examples of gay marriages in pre-colonial Africa, particularly Uganda, which is why erasing any positive conversation, history, or information about African LGBTQ cultures is integral to upholding the hatred of LGBTQ people in Africa. When many African people groups were colonized, many destroyed their own ethnic religious artifacts and taught mostly Christian or Muslim values to the next generations, effectively making many of the modern generations unaware of the many African ethnic groups that were open to same-sex relationships. Many foreign historians and sociologists like Dryberg took note of same-sex practices that were common amongst Ugandan ethnic groups, and two of these groups, the Teso and Karajamang, were noted to have marriages between men and a separate or third gender for people who were born male. The Teso people, who mostly resided in eastern Uganda and parts of Kenya, are a Nilotic group who for many years were cattle herders and millet farmers, before becoming major cotton farmers today. Close relatives, the Karajamang, people who reside in northeast Uganda, are speculated to have migrated out of Ethiopia in 1600 AD and have been in Uganda ever since. It's really fascinating to think that so many of the people who live in East Africa now directly descend from the people who lived in the ancient kingdoms of Egypt and Nubia, but that's a topic for another time. These two groups, the Karajamang and Teso, both had an alternative social status or gender role for males who could marry other men. The Daku were men who were seen as impotent or unable to achieve an erection for a woman, were able to live as women and marry other men. Because of our ideas about gender and sexuality are different today, some people may attribute this new identity as trans or non-binary, which I think could be true. Because while the Dako were viewed as men who became women socially, their marriages were still viewed as two men marrying men. But leave no room for doubt. This wasn't the only instance these people were to have recorded narratives about sexual male intimacy. Ethnographer Jack Dryberg did note that it seemed every group in the area seemed to disregard or deny same-sex activity in their own ethnic groups, while pointing to neighboring groups and saying they had more of these relationships in surrounding areas. If we were using our reasoning skills, it's easy to understand why these informers would deny these relationships in their own families and communities. By the 18th and 19th centuries, British colonialism had already made gay intimate acts and relationships in these territories illegal. So why would these informants tell on themselves or their own people? It would make sense that many of these informers would have diverted this information away from their own people in order to keep good relations with the British colonialists. Though some things are changing, Uganda being under the moral judgment of Western colonialism is still a problem. And Ugandan LGBTQ people now face up to 20 years in prison or the death penalty under 2023's Anti-Homosexuality Act. When people try to diminish our voices as gay LGBTQ people and say this conversation isn't that big of a deal or irrelevant, remind them that many LGBTQ people in our home continent are literally being hunted and disowned by their families and communities. If this isn't a big deal or a relevant conversation, then why are Ugandan politicians making LGBTQ people public enemy number one? What we are seeing now is a global conversation about gender and human rights, and I hope those listening can see that it's time we liberate ourselves from the dark ideas perpetuated by colonialism.